All right, so we're gonna finish that truck talk we had a little while ago. So, Triple X Rescue Ranch, where'd he get his name? Well, he got it because it's on Triple X Road. And if you go back to that number one truck talk we had, I was telling you about this fella who had all his land and his wife was going to take it away from him. Well, he got with a friend of his and he traded all this land for a old Sunday mule this guy had. And they made it all legal. And that lady lost, she lost her home and lost her self a husband. And then that old boy went back and bought that, or traded that land back for that mule. So that land all belonged to him. And so then after that land had been sitting there for a while, this is back in the 20s, the moonshiners moved in. He sold little pieces here and little pieces there, and families moved in like they normally do. Well, then there became a sort of a clientele between Luther up on the north and Norman down on the south. And there's this old dirt road that connected both of them. And people didn't have a lot back then. It was a hard life for them. So they about the only thing they could enjoy was each other's company and some moonshine. Well, this area up here has got a lot of these spring-fed wells from this aquifer that's up here. So people naturally gravitated towards moonshine. If you know anything about moonshine, well, then there's an X that they put on that moonshine bottle when it comes out of the still. So about the first 10% of it gets a single X. They set that aside because you don't want to be drinking that. And then about another 20% comes out of there, and you're going to put a double X on that. You can drink it. It's still a little harsh, but it's not too bad. But then the sweet stuff, the good stuff, that's when the middle part comes in. That middle part's cooked and it's just right. So you put 3 X's on those moonshine bottles that you put out. And you'll run that still for a while, and then, it'll start to get a little off, and then you'll start to see when you taste it, it tastes a little different. It's not as smooth. You put 2 X's on that, and then you'll let it run for a little while, and then last tail end of that come off, and you'll put another X on it, and you'll be done with your moonshine run. And you put all that stuff in a bottle, and you separate them. Some people mix them, but good moonshiners don't do it. You just use that middle batch, and that's 3 X's. Well, you see, back in the 20s, it was right after, like 1910, and this is when Henry Ford had done his Model T and Model A and stuff, and they'd coming out, and that's what people was driving, and then it got a little better, and they had 6-cylinder motors, and they were running these 6-cylinder motors up and down here, 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder motors, and the law enforcement had those 6-cylinder motors, and they were going around here in these cars, and they were patrolling. And then long about the time that, about 32 or so, the Ford Motor Company come out with a V8, 8 cylinders. And that's when stuff changed. So these moonshiners had a lot of money back then, and they were doing their best to outrun the law. So the legend is they went up to St. Louis and bought themselves some souped up V8 cars, and a lot of horsepower, about twice as much. They was running them up and down these roads, these dirt roads, running that moonshine late at night. Police couldn't catch them. Sheriff couldn't catch them. Nobody could catch them because the cars were too fast. Well, then somebody apparently got run over, and then another person got run over, and sheriff called all these moonshiners together. He said, "Boys, you and I understand what you're doing, and well, you know I'm not going to catch you, but you also know I can't let you be running up and down these roads running people over. So how about we come to a little agreement? That one dirt road that goes all the way from Luther down to Norman, I want you to stay on that road. I want you to go anywhere else. You stay on that road, you can service all your customers. They can come down the road. Nobody's going to bother you. You won't even see any law over there. You go off that road, and we're going to come and get you. But as long as you stay on that road, you'll be all right. Do your business. Take care of your clients. Stop running over the civilians." And everybody came to an agreement. So they did that agreement for a while, just ran up and down that dirt road. And then a little while after that, a city council member said, "Hey, I'd like to make a motion that we start to name some of these streets and roads after some of our prominent citizens." They named them after places and citizens, and then they come to this one road that went up and down these moonshiners were on. They said, "What do you want to name that road?" He said, "That's an old road. Nobody uses that one. Let's just X it out. Let's put 3 X's up there because nobody runs that road up and down there." And they all kind of agreed and put 3 X's on it. Well, it was Triple X later. And Triple X Road now goes from Luther down to Norman. And it was an old moonshine road. Kept the moonshiners away from the population. Many years later, they started to develop the land out there, put houses up. And there was a fella came out here and bought 10 acres of land and put up a barn, moved a trailer out here. And they dropped an old water well in there. And their son was blind. And he'd gone off to blind school. And when he graduated, they brought him back home and built him a house. Wasn't a big house because he was just a little feller. But the house didn't have any windows because he was blind. Didn't need any windows. So they put these eye bolts up on the side of the house. They attached ropes to the eye bolts and ran those ropes out to the barn. They had a bunch of horses out there, and that way the boy could go back and forth. And he had a rope coming out of the front door that went over to the water, and he could turn the water on for him. And he had a rope going into the barn so he could feed him. And he had a rope going out to the back pasture so he could open the gates. Those people moved on, and then another fellow moved in, and well, he'd bought the property, but he had another property on the road that he really lived on. He was just going to use this for pasture. Didn't do much with it, and it sat for about 10 years. Then this old boy from Texas showed up. He's a contractor working out in Tinker, and his dream was to have a place that he could raise horses and run a little business, so he wasn't losing money coming back and forth from Fort Worth. Well, his dream came true. So him and that other fellow, they shook hands and signed the papers and sold the property. And an old boy from Texas moved up here and started working the land and had a couple horses he put on it. And then some folks couldn't take care of their horses. They had to give them up, so he decided he'd give them a home. And Then a friend said, well, there's a horse that the city has. They got turned into the city. And it got turned in on your birthday. So you might want to go down there and see, because it's your birthday horse. So some boy from Texas went down there and looked at that horse, his old race horse. And he made a deal with the city and brought that horse back. That horse was a little skinny. So this fella from Texas decided that, well, now's the time. So he put himself a sign up here on the front road. And, that sign says Triple X Rescue Ranch. That old horse that he bought's sitting right over there, that's Marco. That old boy that started that Texas ranch on Triple X Road. Well, you're looking at him. And that's how the Triple X Rescue Ranch got its name, and how Triple X Road came to be. So, time to feed the horses. We'll talk at you here in a little bit.